in the audience as we were at the Indigo at the O2.
It was a good one, wasn't it?
It was really good. And the energy, although you give some energy, James, not quite the same energy here in the LBC studio as there is in the O2 Indigo.
It focuses the mind. It's scary as well. I mean, to have all those, the whites of all those eyes staring back at you. And of course, you also can pass on any difficult questions to your deputies, which is not an opportunity that you can avail yourself of in this.
Another downside of being in the LBC studio
in this context. Exactly that. Will you be appearing on any picket lines in the coming days?
Well, I have in the past appeared on picket lines. And I think it's really important to make sure we understand that actually the genesis of all these problems, the root cause of all these problems, are government policies. It's either the government, pulling the strings of their oil companies or not giving, whether it's their oil companies, whether it's TfL, whether it's the NHS, whether it's our schools, the monies they need to give their workers a decent pay rise.
So no, you won't be appearing on any picket lines in the coming days. Tomorrow, for example.
No, I mean, I'm afraid I won't, simply because of pressure of work and stuff. But I think it's really important for.
So you would do otherwise?
Absolutely. Listen, the trade unions have been a real force for good to our country over the recent weeks, months, and years. And I'll give you the best.
Would that be a sackable offence for you? I don't want to preempt any callers' questions, but would you not run the risk of getting fired if you turned up on a picket line?
I think Londoners would, who are my employers.
From the party.
No, listen. I mean, there are members of our party, who've been on picket lines in the last few weeks, months, and years. What's really important, though, is for people to understand, those who aren't members of a trade union, the benefits everyone receives by the campaigning trade unions do. And the best example in recent times, James, is during the pandemic. It was the trade unions who worked with us to make sure public transport was safe, not just for their staff, and by the way, more than 100 transport workers lost their lives, but for commuters as well. It was the trade unions in the NHS, in our schools, in transport and so forth, who worked incredibly hard. And as a trade unionist, I'm incredibly proud of the work they've done.
I suspect that this issue will return in the course of the coming minutes. Shall we turn to the phones and find out?
Wow, I've got loads of callers. I'll do them in order. I've got them down on my iPad. First one is Hector from Ledbury. Good morning, Hector.
Good morning, James. Good morning, Sadiq. My question to you, Sadiq, is with Sam Tarry's sacking yesterday and Liz Truss appearing destined for number 10, it appears as though Labour is no longer the party of working people and the Conservatives are no longer the party of sound fiscal policy. So my question to you is a two-parter. Firstly, what's kind of your reflection on that? And also, what is your advice to a centrist voter who feels totally unrepresented for the past decade?
Well, just let me clarify for people who don't know. Sam Tarry, a shadow transport minister who was fired from his ministerial job yesterday after, I suppose, breaching the party line on picket lines, not just standing on one, but giving interviews to the media, and also, I think, facing deselection in his own constituency as well, which may or may not be pertinent. But what have you got to say to Hector?
Well, Hector, you mentioned your disillusionment over the last 10 years. I'd remind you in a polite, courteous way, for the last 12 years, we've not been in power. We've not been in government. And the Conservatives have had a Prime Minister for the last 12 years, the first 5 years, by the way, in coalition with the Lib Dems. And of course, many people share your frustrations about the policies of this government, which are leading to the sort of strikes we're seeing across various sectors this summer. And the job of the Labour Party is to make sure we represent ordinary people like yourselves, ordinary families like yours, I suspect, across the country. And so, look, a couple of things, and I think we've got to disentangle the two issues you mentioned in your two-parter. Firstly, my understanding is, and I've not had a chance to speak to Sam or Keir, both of whom are dear friends, is firstly, Sam wasn't sacked for joining a picket line. My understanding is it was for not following the process a member of the shadow front bench should follow when they're doing media and the lines they give to media. So be under no illusion, the Labour movement is very much the Labour Party and the trade unions, and I'm really proud of that link. Secondly, we should be worried about what Liz Truss is suggesting in relation to basically taking away the tool in the toolkit trade unions have to go on strike. And by the way, Hector, somebody who deals regularly with trade unions, no trade unionist, whether the General Secretary or a member, wants to go on strikes. It's because they're at the end of their tether. They've got no other tool in their toolkit that ultimately they've got to put down their tools and go on strike. And that's why it's incredibly important to try incredibly hard to resolve disputes amicably rather than the government pulling the strings almost to create this summer of discontent. So it's them versus us, the government, people against trade unions. Let's not fall into that trap.
Hector, do you want to come back to the mayor? You don't have to.
If that's all right, thank you very much.
Briefly, though.
Yeah, I mean, just to help. I mean, I'm sort of cautiously supportive of the strikes, and I wasn't quite clear exactly on your response regarding the sacking of Sam Tarry. So what exactly was that reason? I know you've said it before, but it was not clear.
So Hector, yeah, apologies. It's my fault, not yours. All I know is from what I've read in the media and what Sam said and what Keir Starmer's office have said, which is that the sacking was not for Sam Tarry being on the picket line. There are other members of the front bench who have been on the picket line in recent weeks who haven't been sacked. My understanding is that because the shadow cabinet and shadow ministers have got to have collective responsibility, it's a boring process point, but you've got to do two things. One is to make sure when you're doing media, your lines are consistent with the shadow cabinet's policy, and secondly, that your line manager, in this case the shadow secretary of state, knows you're doing media, and those processes are followed. And bear in mind, the Labour Party wants to be a government in waiting, and is, in my view, a government in waiting. Those rules apply both in government and also when you're, Her Majesty's official opposition. And I speak to somebody, by the way, who used to be a minister, and it would frustrate the hell out of me, having stayed in my lane, just talk about the area I'm the minister of and not be able to go outside the policy agreed at shadow cabinet or at cabinet. But that's what, being a member of the shadow cabinet or shadow minister means, I'm afraid.
I didn't realise that the RMT disaffiliated from Labour as long ago as 2004 and even voted against rejoining the party when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader in 2018. So I mean, I suppose most of us think of the trade union movement and the Labour movement as being inextricably entwined, but these two institutions are not entwined at all anymore.
For a long time, and look, not every trade union needs to be affiliated to the Labour Party, and the Trade Union Congress has many trade unions who aren't affiliated to the Labour Party. We encourage trade unions to become affiliated to the Labour Party because we are a movement. The Labour movement is bigger than the Labour Party and bigger than trade unions. They're teamwork. And by the way, the Labour Party was formed from workers who'd organised into trade unions because collective bargaining is a better way to get better terms and conditions for yourself. But trade unions aren't just about producers, their members. They're also about consumers, citizens, and there are many examples. I speak as a proud trade unionist of the trade unions bringing benefits to wider society because of the bargaining they do. Sometimes, by the way, they have to go on strike to reach the improvements they want to reach.
Which is what's happening on your watch, isn't it, in August, when London Underground workers will stage a fresh strike in their long-running dispute with you over jobs and pension.
Yeah, and my frustration in relation to this is, look, before the pandemic occurred, before we had, coming out of the pandemic, we'd managed to reduce strike action in London since I became mayor by about 75%. So before I was mayor, the previous mayor had never met the trade unions in 8 years as mayor. I meet them regularly, all of them, by the way, those affiliated, those not affiliated, and that's led to working with the trade unions. We've made massive savings. We've reduced the amount of jobs in TfL, reduced the amount of agency staff in TfL, really have reduced the deficit in a big way and reduced the number of strikes. Because of the pandemic, because of the conditions the government's attaching, RMT are nervous about the conditions of their members and have gone on strike. And the point I'd make, and again in a polite, courteous way to the RMT, is the wrong people are being punished as a consequence of your strike action. It's not TfL, it's not Londoners who are responsible for the concerns that you have. And in a way, you're letting Shaps and the government off the hook by going on strike on August the 19th. And I'm really hoping they'll reconsider.
Their contention is that you haven't told them what's in the funding settlement you've received from the government, and they need to know what's in it in order to be assured on the issues of jobs, pensions and working conditions.
Well, firstly,
so can't you just tell them?
They're right. We've not shared with them what's in the draft proposal from the government for the simple reason it's market sensitive in relation to... So even at the TfL board meeting yesterday, these are members of the TfL board aren't aware what's in the draft proposal because in the Commissioner's words...
Because it will affect the share prices of private sector companies that work in the...
No, TfL ostensibly is pension is private in relation to this, but also we're listed and so forth, and we borrow. The issue is not we're listed, beg your pardon. The issue is we borrow.
So it affects
yes.
the terms of your loans.
It's market sensitive, and so even members of the board aren't aware what's in the draft proposal. But I just want to reassure the RMT in relation to the concerns they have, which are basically three categories: jobs, conditions and pensions. That's at the fore of our mind as well in relation to this, because those things help us deliver the world's finest transport authority there is, which is TfL.
So you would look an ordinary member in the eye, or indeed you would look Mick Lynch in the eye and say, trust me, the settlement's all right on those three fronts?
No, what I'd say to Mick Lynch is firstly, thank you. For all trade unions, their workers, right. Honestly, James, one of the saddest things I had to do was write letters to families saying, giving my condolences because they lost their life for doing the right thing. So firstly, it's thank you, and genuinely sincere, and I mean it. Secondly is the conditions from the government are tough. They've been tough for the last 2.5 years. Right. Trust me in relation to trying to argue to get the best possible deal for our city. That means both the citizens, those who come into our city, but also our workers. And fourthly, work with me. We're on the same side here in relation to lobbying the government, getting public opinion on our side to make sure the government's proposal isn't anti-London, which, by the way, is anti the country's economy, because you don't get a national recovery without a London recovery. You don't get a London recovery without TfL firing all cylinders. And so we're on the same side here. Let's work together.
And I would add that Mick Lynch is my guest on this week's Full Disclosure, which will drop a little later than usual because we're actually conducting the interview after tomorrow's show. 10:15 is the time. Should we take another call?
Yeah, loads of calls this morning. The second one is
there always is.
Well, I've been told not as many as when I'm on with you, James, but there you go.
Who told you that,
second one's from Finsbury Park. It's Zan. Good morning, Zan.
Good morning, Mayor. Last week, I sent you a dossier about sexual harassment crisis on TfL with 20 pages of testimonies of assault from girls as young as 11, which you have ignored. I was victim to harassment on the tube in January and told by British Transport Police there was nothing they could do as all tube carriage CCTV deletes after 72 hours. Your current media campaign does not go far enough. So where are all the police officers on tube carriages? Where are the rape alarms on buses? Where is the working CCTV that can actually prevent this violence against women from happening on TfL?
Well, Zan, very sorry if you've not got a response to your letter. Just so you know, I do know about it, and we've discussed it, and you should have had a response, but an apologies you haven't. You'll get a response, and we will meet with you. And secondly, I'm really sorry about the experience you've had, which is not uncommon for women and girls in our city. I can't promise you a rape alarm on every single bus or a police officer in every single carriage as you just referred to. What I can promise you is we have 2,500 police officers who go around the underground to try and make sure it's safe as possible. We are making sure that we make more progress in relation to tackling any crime on the underground, and that includes encouraging people to report what happens on the underground. And I'll be the first to admit my experience on public transport as a man is very different from yours as a woman, and that's why it's really important that TfL take seriously any complaint made to them from women and girls, and we encourage women and girls to make those complaints. I supported, by the way, the change in the law to make upskirting a criminal offence because, again, as a bloke, nobody's tried to take a photograph of me inappropriately, and it's really important we have a zero tolerance towards that. I can't pretend, though, that ending violence against women and girls is simply a policing matter or a TfL matter every 3 days.
Extending CCTV storage for longer would be quite straightforward. Yeah,
that's one of the reasons why we agreed, and apologies, and it's not happened, to meet with you in relation to this issue. There's a number of issues in relation to CCTV. Some trains haven't got CCTV, the older trains. We're making sure, though, Zan, every new train we buy has CCTV on them. It's difficult to retrofit CCTV in some of our older trains. It's just not possible to do so, particularly when we're about to procure new trains. But I'm not going to pretend that reducing violence against women and girls is simply a policing issue. And that's one of the reasons why I welcome Liz Truss announcing yesterday what I've been talking about for months now, about simple things: make sexual harassment in a public place a criminal offence, make misogyny a hate crime so it's properly recorded, make sure we're dealing with this in our schools in relation to education of our children, particularly boys, but also in relation to dealing with sexism, misogyny before it becomes abusive and a crime like you've experienced. But Zan, we do take the issues you raised, and I've read the 19 various other complaints raised by women in London, and we'll be working with you to address some of these issues, but I'm not going to pretend all the issues you've raised can be addressed by us, particularly, by the way, when we've not got a deal from the government about both revenue or capital.
So some of them could be, though, couldn't they?
Absolutely.
As we've alluded to.
Some of
Most
them,
obviously, perhaps alarms on buses and cameras on trains.
And Zan, just to reassure you, we have made sure all our staff, that includes bus drivers and those in the underground, are better trained in relation to how they respond to a complaint made by you. We have made sure there are staff at every single station. We have made sure there's better signage in relation to them, not just people reporting it, but better lit areas of public realm. But, every 3 days, someone in the country, a woman, is murdered by a man. So it really is an epidemic of violence against women and girls.
Zan, what was your treatment like apart from the outwardly unbelievable facts about the CCTV? Did you feel respected and listened to when you brought your complaint to the police?
I would just like to add that I was told that we only had 72 hours for the evidence, but that time had passed because she'd been on annual leave. Right. So, in my opinion, she should have passed the case to someone who was going to be present when I was calling, because that's a very, very small window for victims to come forward. So it's incredibly important that every hour there's somebody available at the other end of the line to take this issue further.
Fair enough.
Zan, I can't disagree with anything you've just said or rebut that, because it's patently common sense and the obvious thing to do. And my concern is that person has got away with it, and who knows how many other people he's treated the way he treated you.
And keep in touch with us as well, Zan, if you would, so that we can check that the Mayor's response is as fulsome as he is promising. Okay.
Thanks, Zan. Thanks for your call. And I promise you we will be in touch. And after this, I'll text my office to make sure that's happened as well, Zan. The next caller is from Barnet, and it's Kevin. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Mr. Khan. Good morning, James.
Hello,
Mr. Khan, back in 2018, in a Mayor's question, it was raised with you that air conditioning on London buses did not function. You said you were going to deal with it. In 2019, the air conditioning on London buses still did not work. In 2020, summer, you turned the air conditioning off because of COVID. But in November of the same year, you appointed a contractor to come in and upgrade the air conditioning system on London buses. In July last year, 21, Jason called, another bus driver, called into the show and told you that the air conditioning on London buses was still not working. Well, Mr. Khan, in 2022, we had 40 degrees in London. It was 44 degrees inside a bus cab, and the air conditioning still does not work. And to make this even worse, 25% of London bus routes don't have a toilet at one end. So drivers can't rehydrate, drivers can't cool down. What are you going to do about it this time, Mr. Khan?
So, Kevin, sorry, you're saying there's no air cooling, it's air cooling, not air conditioning. Air cooling in the cab or in the bus?
In the cab. Bus drivers are driving around in bus cabs.
Sorry.
I've seen temperatures of 44
Understood.
degrees.
That's illegal for a start.
And you said last year you were going to contact Jason, who called in. I've spoken to Jason. He had no follow-up.
No, he did. That's not correct. And that he did a follow-up because every time I come back on LBC, I make sure, and it's just a fact, James, that the promises I made in the previous speech to Sadiq have been action. So that's not accurate. In relation to the air cooling, that has been resolved, and so let me.
Well, he's in a bus. You're a bus driver.
No, I understand. So
it's not been resolved, Mr. Khan.
Right. Well, let me go back and check that because, and again, before I come on Speak to Speak next month, I'll make sure I've got a response so I can next time when I'm challenged, say it's been responded. But let me be frank. 41 degrees. We aren't ready for that. All right. We aren't ready for 40 degrees. We're not ready for mid-30s as a city. Put aside buses, tubes, homes, places of work, the public realm. We are not ready for the consequences of climate change, and we'd have to spend billions of pounds just on public transport to get our public transport fit for purpose for 40 degrees. That's no excuse, by the way, if the air cooling isn't working in the cabin. So, Kevin, I promise I will take that away, and if you're willing to give James your number, I will separately ring you today to give you the answer in relation to me being reassured that the air cooling is working. In relation to the toilets, by the way, when I first became mayor, I made sure, because it's an issue of dignity, but also women bus drivers have real challenges, particularly when they're on their period, if there aren't toilets for obvious reasons. And I was ridiculed in my first 18 months when we put in more than 100 toilets in various routes across London, because some of them were temporary toilets, some of them didn't look very attractive, and the residents complained. And it was a big campaign from mainly Tories and anti-trade unionists, about why I had acceded to Unite's request, United Trade Union, another example, by the way, James, of the benefit of trade unions, of having bus drivers having access to toilets. I'm not aware of the routes you referred to, Kevin, but I appreciate you may want to keep anonymity. If you were to give James the routes where there aren't loos, again, I'll look into that, because in 2022, it's not acceptable for a bus driver not to have access to a toilet at both ends of a journey.
Not to be pedantic, I don't know whether you were ridiculed or not, but the complaints were fairly valid. People didn't want portaloos at the bottom of their front gardens, did they?
No, there was ridicule about my priority, my first year being loos for bus drivers, right?
Okay.
But it is important for bus drivers to have access to loos and so forth. The alternative, by the way, was bus drivers being criticised for, male bus drivers for going to the toilet on the side of a wall of people's homes and stuff, because they're so desperate to go for a pee, or parking their buses to go to, a McDonald's to go to the toilet and so forth. So that's why I was perfectly happy to be ridiculed in my first year.
My workload is getting bigger with every call at the moment. All of the following up and checking back.
James, the reason why it's
supposed to be an easy hour for me.
No, James, the reason why I say this is because I should be held to account, but also I need to be reassured that people like Kevin, and he mentioned Jason, have had their calls, actions. So this is a way. I mean, you can separately, Kevin, email City Hall, or contact me in City Hall. But this is a good way of the checks and balances to make sure.
For sure.
This concern, which is upsets me, Kevin, that bus drivers haven't got the toilets that you're mentioning. The air cooling, again, I was reassured that's been action. Again, I'll follow both those things up.
I suppose we should give you some credit there for talking about bus drivers for about 8 minutes without mentioning your late father.
Well, but on a serious note, that's why it upsets me.
I know,
in another life, my father's passed away, but in another life, Kevin will be my dad. Imagine not being able to go to the loo, but imagine if you're a woman bus driver on a pit. It's upsetting, and it shouldn't be happening, Kevin. And I apologise profusely if it has happened. So I'm not going to pretend that there isn't a route where there's not access to a toilet, or that your bus drivers haven't had a big problem. Bus drivers have had a big problem, particularly Monday, Tuesday last week, as have tube drivers, as have people who work in a building that's really, really hot. Think about those who work in buildings where the temperatures have been very hot, or those in whose own home is incredibly hot. And that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about energy efficiency, about dealing with the consequences of climate change, about dealing with the causes of climate change, because we can't allow 40 degrees to be the new norm. We simply can't.
Well, we will make sure that you do get back in touch with Kevin, and we'll perhaps hear from Kevin and even Jason again. And when you mention anonymity, that's because these lads work for, and these women
the
work
concern
for,
they've got, the concern
private
they've got,
sector companies who may be a little bit unsympathetic to them.
The concern I've got for Kevin and other bus drivers, it's an issue that's been raised to me in a number of fields, whether it's the Met Police Service, whether it's private bus operator companies, is if they are, inverted commas, a whistleblower, dobbing in their employer, will they get in trouble? They shouldn't, but I can understand why people are nervous they may. So wherever you work, if it's the fire service, the police service, a private company who has a contract with TfL, London Underground, if you've got a concern, I want you to feel safe letting me know about these issues without being worried about reprisals.
27 after 10 is the time. I'll take another call in just 1 second. Just your thoughts on Boris Johnson's current situation. I mean, specifically the fact that he's not going to be Prime Minister for much longer, and then also your thoughts perhaps on the meeting with Alexander Lebedev.
Well, my first starting point is, look, I read this morning that the energy bills of Londoners and those across the country in January could be as high as £500 a month. The cap is going to be north of £3,500 a year, and at the same time, people like Centrica are making profits of 1.3 billion, as indeed are Shell. Now, what a Prime Minister should be doing is focused on dealing with that outrage about massive profits for these companies and families basically choosing between, in winter, heating and eating, in summer, turning on a fan or not, because the choice is so difficult. Parents skipping a meal to feed the kids. And what our Prime Minister, to feed the kids, what our Prime Minister should be doing is focused on that. That should be an obsession when he or she wakes up in the morning and goes to bed, not fulfilling a boyhood dream to be a poor man's middle-aged Tom Cruise flying a private plane, holding a lavish party in Chequers. This guy's clinging on to power, not because he wants to improve people's lives, but because he's a junket king. And so it does make me angry, because I speak to people every day. Kevin's a good example. If we had decent investment in public transport, he would have decent facilities to drive in. If we had decent investment in, crime prevention, Zan and other women would feel safe and so forth. And then we hear, by the way, this information was dragged out of him, through the liaison committee. The liaison committee are the chairs of the various select committees, cross-party chairs, some Tory, some Labour, some Lib Dem, I think some maybe SNP, who every few months get a chance to question the Prime Minister. And we now discover, because of their excellent questioning, that when he was the Foreign Secretary, by the way, he was meeting somebody, and this is a fact. A former head of the KGB questioned what his involvement.
I don't know if he was the head, was he? The KGB.
I thought the London branch, but you know better than I do. So apologies. Without having officials present, without having security present, and so forth. And just think about the context of Putin, what Putin's been doing, the concerns we have about security. He's a foreign secretary. The potential, when we know from our history, of politicians being blackmailed and so forth. And that's why it raises concerns. Look, probably nothing inappropriate happened. Probably Boris Johnson didn't divulge anything he shouldn't have done. And probably, there wasn't information on Johnson that could lead to blackmail in the future. But why take the risk? Why not have officials present? Is a party in Italy so important you will need to compromise national security? And look, these are legitimate questions which Johnson should be answering to reassure us there are no problems. For me, though, it goes to an issue of judgment, right? Because, it's an issue of judgment. And this is one of the reasons why, by the way, many of us thought Johnson was not fit to be the Prime Minister. And both Truss and Sunak, and many of those in the Conservative Party, and all of those in Parliament, supported, defended and enabled this guy to be our Prime Minister. And he still is.
Which would you prefer to win from the point of view of a senior Labour politician, someone who may be in the cabinet or the shadow cabinet in the future? Who would you rather be up against, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss?
Yeah, you obviously want the weaker opponent. If you think about it as a boxing match.
Yes and no, because you've also, if they will be in charge of the country for a while. So.
That's my point. The point I was going to make was so I answer this, in terms of both party interest and national interest. Yeah. I want whoever wins to deal with the issues, cost of living crisis, inflation, security, violence against women and girls, and so forth. So the tribal politician, wants the weaker candidate to win, but the patriot wants the better candidate to win. Whoever wins, in my view, should call a general election, because my view is both a continuity Johnson, and we need to give the British public the option of a fresh start, and that's a general election with a Labour government led by Keir Starmer.
So you're going to give me a name?
No.
Okay. Can I ask you about the personal impact of an Asian Prime Minister if it were Rishi Sunak to win the...
Listen,
does it matter? If you disagree with the politics completely, does the shared ethnicity matter to you? And you can only answer for yourself on this issue, but as a white bloke, I'm very interested.
It does. Look, there's two issues. One is the Conservative Party deserve credit, because whoever wins is making history. The third woman Prime Minister, we've had zilch, although we've had two temporary leaders. The first ethnic minority, who, by the way, he's not just an ethnic minority, he's a religious minority.
Yes.
It is a big deal. Now, the fact is, the challenge for either of them is to address the inequalities that women and minority and people of colours and minorities suffer. That's the challenge for both of them. Query whether they're going to do that, bearing in mind the track record of the last 12 years. But you can't escape the fact, James, that a person of colour growing up in our country is going to be seen the most powerful person in the country who looks like them, who's a person of colour, who's a religious minority as well as an ethnic minority. It is a big deal. And similarly, as the father of two daughters, bearing in mind that the impact the Lionesses are having on physical fitness, on girls thinking they can be elite sports people, think about a third female Prime Minister. And, and that should make us proud. The issue is what they will do and how they will deliver as, a woman, which Liz Truss clearly is, and Rishi Sunak as an ethnic minority and a religious minority. And by the way, there are countries, in the Western world, particularly, in other parts of the globe, who will be envious that we've got the situation. And I wish both of them, whoever wins, for the national interest reasons, James, the best of luck. Clearly, I'm hoping they call a general election so we can have a fresh start.
Do you think they will?
No, because I've seen the polls. But the important thing is in my view, for the British public to get a chance. What should have happened, by the way, is Raab as the deputy PM should have become the caretaker PM, allowed Johnson to make his millions.
Are you sure? Is that a precedent? I'm not sure that is a precedent. I mean, when has that happened before?
Well, we've not had in a similar situation Deputy Prime Minister before. So what's happened in the past is not a Prime Minister who's caretaker, who's flying planes and throwing hand grenades and
yes.
Having lavish parties at Chequers.
And at the JCB
same
owners' mansion as well. They're having a big party there soon.
Yeah. At the same time as we're facing the crisis we're facing across the country, where the waiting lists on the NHS is just remarkable in relation to there are more than 6 million people waiting for treatment on the NHS, real problems in recruitment in the NHS, nurses, doctors and so forth, and he's having lavish parties.
We've got time for one more call, I think.
Let's do it. The next caller is Plamina, I hope I got that right, from Canary Wharf.
Yeah, you did. Hello.
Hi, morning.
Morning, nice to speak to you.
You too.
My question is regarding rent in London. So private rent in London rose by 34% in 1 year in some areas. These numbers exceed the drop of rent seen during the pandemic. And my question basically is, are you planning to take any actions to protect the tenants of this city, like me, from the abuse of estate agents and landlords?
So this is the issue that causes Londoners the most concern, because a third of Londoners now renting privately. Yes, is the answer, with the limited powers I have. So during the pandemic, we managed to persuade the government to put a moratorium, a stop on private tenants being evicted because of failure to pay the rent for obvious reasons. We've also managed to persuade the government not to have tenants paying a fee to the estate agents when they move tenancy. And we've also managed to persuade the government to have a register of dodgy landlords. So we're making progress with the government. What the government needs to do is two big things. One is to freeze private rents in London for the next 2 years. That would save you about £3,000 of those 2 years, because you simply can't afford, many people I speak to, with your wages not going up with the cost of living, with rents exceeding even inflation, you can't afford to make ends meet. So what Londoners are doing is going to smaller homes, overcrowded accommodation, and they're really struggling. And the second thing the government should be doing is to give me the powers to have rent controls. The argument the government have is let the market decide. We shouldn't interfere with the market. The market isn't working for the reasons you've highlighted. So I'm lobbying the government to give me the powers to have rent control.
But they won't, will they?
Well, there's a general election around the corner, and if these guys won't, Plamina, it's another reason for there to be a general election for people like you to be given the opportunity to vote for a party that is willing to give me the powers to have rent control. So we can make sure in London, people like you who are working, and it will take us some time to build the homes we need in relation to the demand for homes. But until we have the right supply meeting the demand, we've got to control the rents private landlords charge.
And to the landlord who says, well, my energy bills are going up, my rental incomes are my only income, my cost of living is rocketing as well. It's basic economics that I put up the price of the service that I provide. What do you say to them? So
what we want to do is set up a private rent commission, and on that commission we would have, landlords as well as tenant representatives, as well as economists and those in developers, to make sure we didn't inadvertently affect either the pipeline of properties that are available on the market for you to rent, or the pipeline of homes to be built. Some landlords, the commercial landlords, the build-to-rent landlords, do give security for tenants in relation to they want to evict you, and do give you security in relation to the rent increase over the next 3 years. Other landlords, it may be their pension, and there may be a good reason why they've got to increase their rents. Other landlords, though, frankly speaking, are just making profit because they know the demand doesn't meet the supply. And we would, as part of our private rental commission, look at those issues.
Just a little thing. I guess I've fallen into this trap as well, and my colleague Natasha Devon has pointed it out, that Rishi Sunak wouldn't be the first ethnic or religious minority
I know.
Prime Minister because of Benjamin Disraeli.
Yeah. I talk about person of colour, but Natasha's spot on
as always.
In relation to that.
You can hear Natasha show on LBC at the weekend. And speaking of doing your homework, final question, just a bit of fun. Nadine Dorries has just told journalists that we haven't had a sporting event like this in the UK since the 2012 Olympics, as she welcomes the opening of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Can you spot the flaw in what the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport has just said?
Well, hopefully she'll be watching the game on Sunday, and she'll be seeing the brilliant job that the Lionesses do on Sunday, finally bringing it
That's not it.
home. in relation to big sporting event.
Well, in relation even to the Commonwealth Games.
What's the quote?
She said, "We haven't had a sporting event like this in the UK since the 2012
Oh,
Olympics."
yes, of course. Well, there's been Commonwealth Games in the UK, and I'm sorry Nadine missed those, and she should go and watch.
Where were they?
Well, I know City play in a former Commonwealth stadium. Glasgow, of course, is the one that people remember, simply because I saw Sir Chris Hoy. This is me name dropping Chris Hoy, who I saw last week. Chris Hoy, a Scottish Commonwealth Games champion as well. But yeah, listen. If that's the most objectionable thing that you have against Nadine, James, then she'll be very happy.
It's coming up to 22:11. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks.
It's a pleasure.
And I will. I've got a long list now.
Yeah, I've got Zan and Kevin in particular. I'll get back to you.
And I may chase Jason back up as well and find out about those toilets. But thank you for your time.
Stay safe.
As ever. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
The owner of British Gas has seen its operating profits increase fivefold in the first half of the year. Centrica has reported a figure of £1.3 billion, up from £262 million in the same period last year.